Hello and welcome to the Schola Progenium. Today we'll be talking about lascannons, everything to do with lascannons. So, today we'll be discussing in broad terms what they do, what units can take them, sort of how you should be fitting them into your army, and sort of discussing some of the units that our lascannons aren't so good at handling and how to overcome those issues, so that lascannons can be effective in an all-comers list. So, what do lascannons do? Well, at strength 9, AP -3, lascannons are generally going to do wound on 3s against any vehicle. So, up to knights and land raiders, because knights and land raiders are both toughness 8. So they are your reliable damage dealers to heavy vehicles, and heavy vehicles I classify as anything that is toughness 8. Light vehicles are toughness 6, medium vehicles are toughness 7, and heavy vehicles are toughness 8. So a lot of transports that are toughness 7, you think of them as transports and light vehicles, but they're medium vehicles, and they should be tackled with a lascannon. Now, so the benefits: the high damage, the high strength, they'll wound anything on 3s. And the AP -3 means that unless they've got an invuln save, such as eldar vehicles or knights, they will be generally going through the armour without any issues. And if you think about it, in the fluff, that's what a lascannon does. It punches through the armour of heavy vehicles like a hot knife through butter. That's what they're supposed to do in the fluff, and that's what they do in the game. That's what they represent, and that's what they have done for years. So, what are the drawbacks? Well, the main drawback, the key drawback for lascannons is the fact that the damage is a random d6. So although they can do high damage, they can do up to 6 damage, and with enough of lascannons in your army, you will see some 5s and 6s every shooting phase. They can get 1s and 2s, and there's nothing more frustrating than blasting off lascannons, missing with your first unit, hitting a damage with your second unit. They fail their armor save and you get a 1 or something like that. But that can be counteracted with command points, and I would say that if you go for a lascannon heavy army, which can still be a very assault driven army with just a strong lascannon fire support base, then yeah, you want to be spending and holding back your command points in your shooting phase for those d6s on the lascannons, which kind of everybody knows. So, the other disadvantage, but I don't really see this as a massive disadvantage, is the fact that they're only one shot. Now, they're often compared to, say, autocannons, and people say, oh, with autocannons you get 2 shots, so you're more likely to hit. Now, I would say that yes, if you're a guard player, or you're going to be hitting on 4-ups, say later in the game, because you've taken a bit of damage, then yeah, autocannons, you fire more shots. What you've got to remember is you're a marine. Marines start off hitting on 3-ups, and if you don't move, which you shouldn't ever move with vehicles that are carrying lascannons or units that are carrying lascannons, unless absolutely necessary, and it's barely ever absolutely necessary, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a second, then you will be hitting on 3-ups at the beginning of the game, which will massively affect the damage curve in the game and help you in the sort of initial artillery duel, which is something I'll again discuss in more detail in a second. So, you're going to be hitting on 3s, you're more than likely to hit, you're more than likely to wound, it's more than likely to go through the armour, and you're going to do a decent amount of damage, 3 or 4 wounds, more than likely. So, see, the consistent thing there is that they are consistent, they are reliable damage dealers, and in 40k, it's a game of dice, you need reliability as much as you can in the army. You need to reduce the chance of things not working as much as possible. Remember, something with a lascannon is one of your damage dealing units. You're relying on it to punch the enemy armour, to take out the enemy sort of advancing heavy units like the transports and that kind of thing. So you need them to work, you need them to be reliable. It can't be a kind of, oh well, I only did 2 wounds, or oh well, they didn't hit. You need to be putting the damage through. So, how many do you need? Well, if I just look at the previous points and I just look at the idea that you're hitting on a 3-up, and thing, you need units, you need about 6 to 8 lascannons in an army for them to be a reliable part of your army. Now 6 to 8 lascannons is going to cost you roughly, well, if you go for 8 lascannons, 200 points, not including the vehicles, just for the weapons themselves. And that is, you know, a big chunk of weapons. But for that, you will reliably take on enemy heavy support, enemy artillery, tip that artillery duel in your favour early on in the game, even if they get first turn, and then therefore be in a stronger position throughout the game as your heavy support continues to be effective and their heavy support struggles to reduce the effectiveness of your heavy support before it, you know, withers and dies itself. So if you've got your 8 lascannons there and they go first and they manage to destroy one of your lascannon wielding units and sort of take 2 lascannons away from you, which is probably the most they'll manage to take away from you, you'll still have 6 lascannons. And 6 lascannons, you know, put together will destroy a heavy vehicle with a little bit of help maybe from, you know, a couple of heavy bolters topping stuff up, which I'll again go into in another minute, because heavy bolters are a key part of your tactics with lascannons. So you've still got 6 after they've destroyed one of your vehicles. So they think, yes, I've done well, but you still have the amount you need, because remember, 6 is good and 8 is very reliable. So with your 6 lascannon wielding units, maybe a little bit of support at that point, you'll blast away, take away one of their heavy vehicles. They'll fight back at you, but at that point their damage has been reduced, and they probably will make one of your lascannon wielding units less effective, maybe make it hit on 4s instead of 3s, but they won't take them away from you necessarily at that point, if you're playing correctly, because you need to manage your damage curve. At that point, you fire back at them, and with a little bit of help from your heavy bolters, or maybe an autocannon here or there, but that's unlikely, because your units that are using your lascannons will probably be the units that would otherwise be using autocannons, and you don't want to waste slots on autocannons in this with these tactics. So you will ultimately back and forth, wear them down to the point where their heavy support is not putting out as much damage as yours, and eventually the balance tips, you cross the event horizon, you crush their heavy support, and you've still got a tank or 2 left, a heavy support unit or 2 left that can now start turning the tide of the game, start attacking objectives, supporting other units. So I've been mentioning this damage curve, and I'll go into it in a little more detail. Basically, over the course of the game, your heavy support will first start doing damage against their heavy support, and their heavy support will fight back, and you need to be able to consistently put out damage at the points level that the game becomes. So the game will go from a 2,000 point army on each side, maybe a few reserves, but effectively 2,000 points available to be used on each side, down to, you know, a 1750 game in the first turn, very easily, if not more, when everyone's got all their big guns on the table. Could go down to a 1500 point game. So then your list needs to still have, knowing that they'll target your heavier units, probably your lascannon wielding units, because the heavier damage stuff is usually the longer range stuff, so tanks are usually, you know, at threat from early on. Your list then accepting that, okay, if they go first, I could have a 1600 point, even 1500 point list to play with. You need to be able to fight back with that in mind, which means that you need more lascannons than you think you need to start with, and that's why I think 8 is the optimum number, because it doesn't take points away from your assault units. You're not taking ridiculous amounts of heavy support at that point. You can still build a list in a variety of ways, have a variety of styles of lists, but still have those 8 lascannons that in every game are just supporting you, taking on units. Doesn't matter what army you play. You go to a tournament, you've not faced this list before, you've not faced this army before. You go to a new gaming club, you've not faced this opponent before, something like that. Your mate starts collecting a new army, or gets a new army for his birthday, or, you know, buys himself, goes on a splurge, and your lascannons will do what they've got to do against every army. So they're just a good, reliable amount, 8, that you can still have flexibility and do whatever you want to do with the rest of your list. So, who should take these lascannons? Now, remembering the idea of the damage curve, you need to take your lascannons on a variety of units. Now, lascannons can be taken by sort of a few main units. You've got your land raiders, you have predators, you have storm ravens, which are the heavier units that can take lascannons that you sort of want to be considering, and then the two sort of lighter units that you want to be considering taking lascannons on are razorbacks and devastators. So, which units should you take and in what combination for the most effectiveness in your artillery duels to maintain a good damage curve and maintain effectiveness and win in the late game? Well, you've got sort of two classes of unit effectively which are taking these lascannons when you think about it. You've got heavy vehicles and you've got sort of medium vehicle / toughness units, which are your heavy vehicles being your land raider and your storm raven, and your medium vehicles being and your medium units being everything else, your devs, your predator, and your razorback. Now, I think personally the two best units, if I skip straight to it, to carry lascannons are land raiders from the heavy vehicles, and then depending on what you want to do, a razorback, or slightly better, a predator with lascannons and heavy bolters specifically, not all lascannons, and I'll explain why now. So your heavy vehicle, like a land raider, is very difficult to get off the table. It's very difficult to destroy. Of course, yes, there are certain units which can wipe them out, certain knight variants, certain name blade variants, storm, shadow swords, whatever they're called. Certain things can wreck a land raider in one blast with a little bit of luck, or maybe even not that much luck. But 99% of the time, most of the armies you're going to be facing will struggle to shift a land raider in one turn. Yes, they can slow it down. They can probably do, if they really focus on it from long range with all their long range heavy weaponry, 8, 10, maybe even 12 wounds, and make it not hit very well at all. But most of the time, after a big blast from the enemy, first turn, you don't get the first turn, so we're talking sort of disadvantage to you. It'll still be standing, it'll just be hitting on 4s. Now, what that means in terms of the damage curve is that your enemy hasn't reduced the amount of lascannons firing at them, the amount of dice you're throwing at them, at all in the game. So when it comes to your turn, they have effectively achieved nothing, and they know it and you know it. Now, so with that in mind, what they will probably do is shoot at a lighter vehicle, like say a predator or a razorback, or if you've got an exposed units of devs, which you never will in first turn, I'll explain that in a second, they'll kill the devs. But they will go for something that can, if they're smart, reduce the amount of lascannons that you have in your army in the first turn to give themselves that little boost in the artillery drill, and something you want to do to them. That's where you want to be targeting your lascannons, and I'll go into that in a second. So what they'll probably do is they'll probably shoot at, say, a razorback or a predator, because they're medium tanks, they're toughness 7, so they're heavy weapons, they're probably wounding whatever on a 3 anyway, if they're similar to lascannons, like dart lancers, something like that. But they might be more likely to be wounding the predator on 3s than the land raider. Multi-melters, that kind of thing, would wound the land raider on a 4, pred on 3. So they want that first turn push, they're going to go for the easier target. So what they'll do is they'll probably kill a razorback, not a problem, they'll kill that razorback. And if they kill that razorback, you've only lost 2 lascannons, so you've still got, if you've taken 8, 6 lascannons, which means you're off. You can, on your first turn, you're off to a good start, you can carry on the artillery duel, you're not screwed. If you only had 4 lascannons at that point, after the first turn, let's face it, going into the first turn with not that much heavy support, just 4 lascannons, you're going to be pretty buggered. You need to have 6 lascannons in your first turn, whether you go first or second. So, That's why your predators should only ever have 2 lascannons on them. Predominantly, that's the main reason, because they can take a predator out in the first turn. If they take a predator out in the first turn, and you've got 8 lascannons in your list, say 2 predators with 4 lascannons each, they've just halved the amount of lascannons in your list. If the land raider's carrying them, they probably won't pull that off. They probably won't manage that. With a predator, that's very doable, very easy for most armies. If your opponent can't remove a tank in their first turn with long range firepower, you're probably going to win, so don't worry about it. What this means is a slightly other sort of caveat to the predator is the fact that you should take heavy bolters on the side sponsons, because you will need to sometimes top up the lascannon weapons because of that D6, lascannon wounds, because of that D6, because of things such as elder vehicles, deathguard who have, feel no pain on a lot of their sort of demon engines, and knights who have, infant save. You will sometimes need to top up the wounds, and I'll go into that in a bit more detail in just a second. So the one other thing I would say is, if you've got the idea there, so you need to be balancing your lascannons in summary across a variety of units so that the enemy can't take too many away from you, even with a good round of shooting, so you can always respond. So I'd have 4 on a land raider, and then a couple more on predators or razorbacks. Now devastators, a little note on devastators. Now devastators, not a great unit to take lascannons on because they're too squishy. The lascannons are too expensive, and if you set them up on the board exposed in the first turn, they will probably get destroyed, or their effectiveness will be massively reduced. 2 or 3 of them will get killed, and that's because with flyers, with long range cannons from their tanks, that kind of thing. Think about it this way: if you've got a unit of 4 devastators, even if they're sat in a building with a 2-up save, and your opponent has a variety of anti-tank weaponry, and they can shoot that anti-tank weaponry at your land raider via like 8 lascannons at your land raider, or 8 dartlands at your land raider, or something like that, and maybe destroy it, maybe not, probably reduce it to like much less effectiveness but not get it off the board, or shoot at 5 devastators, 4 of which have lascannons. What's he going to shoot at? He'll just shoot them, he'll just wreck them. If he's sensible, that's what he'll do, because he's reduced your firepower. He's killed 4 of your 8 lascannons in turn 1. It's not really taken that much of his resources, or he's flown a little plane over there, shredded them, strafed them, killed them off. So if you're taking devastators, you need to accept this. There's no umming and ahhing about it in deployment. You need to accept that they have to be in a vehicle on turn 1, so that when you roll off, if you get the second turn, they won't just be wiped off the board. And if you get the first turn, you're just going to have to take that -1 to hit. You're just going to have to take it, because it's better that than your devastators just being picked off. A couple hundred points, 250 points wasted, over 250 points wasted, I think, basically. Oh no, it's a bit less, but still a lot of points wasted for nothing. So and if you put them in a razorback with a lascannon, that's pretty good. It takes it from a very vulnerable target to a very annoying target for the enemy to focus on and take out. So the final topic, just a couple more minutes, is on overcoming sort of units that are designed to avoid the dangers of lascannons. So when you've built your all-comers list, you use it all the time, you're distilling it, getting good with that list, you can take on anyone with it. And you come across an opponent who's eldar, and they're harlequins, they've got 4-ups across the board, or eldar with wave serpents that have the shield that they can shoot or use for an infant, that kind of thing. So there's 3 sort of angles of approach you need to take to overcome this, and the 3 things sort of work in unison. So the first thing is you need to just take enough lascannons to overcome this, which sounds very straightforward and simple, but it is just the case. I've talked about the damage curve, so you should understand at that point that some units, your opponent, they've decided to collect harlequins. They like harlequins. They like the costumes or whatever, and they I've taken Harlequins and this unit in specifically in some part because it has this ability, it has this invuln save. That's one of the reasons why when they've looked through their codex or their index, they've gone, sick, I'm going to take that unit, it's got an invuln. When people shoot anti-tank at me in whatever form, there's a 50-50 chance, or, you know, 1 in 3 chance or something like that, that it won't hurt me. Or, you know, some vehicles, you know, they have a -1 to hit. Oh, great, if a guardsman shoots me with a heavy weapon, it's a 5 up to hit. For Space Marine, it's a 4 up to hit. Great. So they've taken that for a reason, and they've spent the points on it, and, you know, that is an element of their army, that is an aspect of their army that is an advantage, but also their armies will be weaker in other ways. So that the Eldar vehicles have less toughness and less wounds. So you're in basically the same boat as you already were. You just need to give your lascannons that little bit of support. And the way you do that is... Oh, and another thing is that do not worry about Knight's invuln save. I cannot underline that enough. Do not worry about a Knight's invuln save. You're like, oh, what? How can I not worry about a Knight's invuln save? You know, it's really good. It's a massive vehicle, 24 wounds, it's toughness 8, it's got a 5 up invuln save. Well, what I would say is that invuln save is exactly equivalent when you're using lascannons, which is what this video is all about, the benefits of using lascannons as your primary heavy weapon. It's just the same as shooting at a Land Raider with a 2 up save. You know, -3 AP goes to a 5 up. So are you telling me that if you see an enemy Land Raider on the board, you don't think, I'll use my lascannons to kill that Land Raider? That's what they're there for. And there is no difference between shooting at a Land Raider, toughness 8, 5 up save, to shooting a Knight, toughness 8, 5 up save. It's just 10 more wounds. You will do the damage. You will finish it off. It's not a problem. So ignore the 5 up save. It's all in your mind. It is not the Knight that bends. It is you. So, excuse me, a little bit of coffee. So, the next thing is that you need to have when you're fighting sort of more specifically against the Eldar vehicles with an invuln save, or vehicles that are hard to hit, you need to combine 2 other things, 2 more specific tactics apart from just having loads of lascannons and sort of going for it, which is that you need to have command points ready, just 1, and you need to pair it with heavy bolters. Now, I mentioned earlier a couple of times in the video the importance of taking units that can carry both lascannons and heavy bolters, such as Land Raiders and Predators. Land Raider can take twin heavy bolters, Predator, twin heavy bolters. Now, the reason for this is as follows. Let's say you shoot your 2 lascannons at an Eldar little skimmer vehicle. It's got 6 wounds, and, you know, ultimately you fire, let's say, 2 lascannons at it, and you end up you know, you get your hit through because you've got a captain in support, so you get your hit 3 with a 1 up, 3 up with a 1 reroll, rerolling 1s. You get your wound through on a 3 up, and you think, right, great, I've got a couple of wounds through there, I've got at least 1 wound through. And then 50-50, they stop it, you know, all in all, give or take, fire a couple of lascannons, you know, you'll probably, most of the time, do, you know, let's say, with a bit of luck, balancing out 2 or 3 wounds to an Eldar vehicle, which isn't that much with your lascannon, maybe 3 or 4. And it may take 4 lascannons to do this. So let's say they're advancing with multiple vehicles, because let's say, looking at the bigger picture, they will have multiple of these skimmers. So let's say they've got sort of 2 to 3 that you're thinking, I could do with killing. That one's got melter pistols in, you know, fusion pistols or whatever. That one's running towards my objective, or going to take out those scouts or whatever. These are the 2 to 3 vehicles that I want to take out with my heavy support. So, you start off, you fire your lascannons, your first burst of lascannons from, say, a Predator at an Eldar skimmer. And let's say, bad luck, you don't get any damage. You only get 1 wound through and he saves it on a 4 up. You know, you just have a bit of bad luck, just slightly tips against you. Do not panic. You have designated your 6 heavy bolters against that vehicle, and you will do 1 to 2 wounds. You know, luck might tip slightly back in your favour, just a little bit of luck, and you'll do 2 wounds. And average to not so good luck, you know, there's a big leeway for error there on the sort of statistics. You'll do 1 wound. You're likely to do 1. So you've got a wound against it, so just don't panic. You then take your second predator, or your razorback, or your lascannon. Now your dice are going to balance out. Don't worry about it. You can have bad turns, yes, it happens. But you know, overall, you've brought your 8 lascannons for a reason, because you want to have enough damage dealing potential to take care of any problems reliably. And you brought your heavy bolters to support them for this reason. So you target that eldar unit with, let's say, just your lascannons or just your heavy bolters, and you move on to the next eldar vehicle with one half of your weapons. So you split your fire with the second vehicle, and this is important. Split your fire with the second vehicle. Now, I'm a big proponent of there's no kill like overkill. You know, I always think you should just focus down a vehicle, but in this situation, this is the tactic, the method that I find works the best. So, spray it down with, say, your other next burst of heavy bolters and clip off another wound, 2 wounds. At this point, you know, averaging out, it'll be on, worst case scenario, 4 wounds and probably, you know, around 3 wounds left. If you miss with your first burst of lascannons. Second burst of lascannons fires at the new vehicle, and look, this time tips slightly on your side, and this time you do 4 wounds to the next skimmer. So you've got one skimmer that's taken, you know, 2-3 wounds because it's had a couple of bursts of heavy bolters on it, but no effective lascannon fire. And the next one's taken a little bit of effective lascannon fire. It's taken, say, 4 wounds. You know, if you're really lucky, it'll just explode. But you let's say 4 wounds, and you've not really spent any command points at this point. So then you've got your final lascannon. Remember, this is early game tactics, and you this just gets divisible as you go on into the game. They'll have less units, you'll have less shooting units. You'll have less shooting units, but less targets. You just keep doing this tactic, but just skim a little off the top each time. So your final unit then looks at, let's say, the third unit that you want to take out, because you've got lucky and you've blown up one of their units, or you've got a little bit of fire support in the area for some other units, and you think, you know, they're quite close to my lines, I've got some rapid fire units, I'll finish them off with rapid fire, and you just blast all of your weapons into this final unit. And good chances are, on the dice, you know, maybe you've still got 4 lascannons left because you've still got your land raids to shoot, you blow it up. You just fire 4 lascannons at the skimmer, and you're going to get through with probably 2, or if you're really unlucky on the dice, 1, but then roll lucky on the damage, and you've saved your command point up to this point. You make sure that you blow up that final target. Or, alternatively, you know, maybe a little later on in the game, you've got fewer less resources, or you got unlucky with your first couple of blasts. You then say, right, which of the first 2 units that I shot at has more wounds, and which has less wounds, which is almost dead. Then you spray your final burst of heavy bolters at the almost dead unit, finish it off, just wreck it. Fire your final lascannon burst, 2 lascannons, because you're taking them always in pairs, which is why I don't think the one-shot issue is an issue, because you're not taking them on tactical marines, really. You can do that in a brigade, but generally you're taking them in pairs, and one will go through. You know, and you blow up those final 2 units. So over the course, the damage curve within the turn, as opposed to the game-wide damage turn, the damage curve within the turn, you've paired your heavy bolters with your lascannons to overcome the enemy's special abilities that prevent lascannons, the big heavy hitting weapons, from doing damage. And because you've overcome that, you have actually had the same effectiveness as you would against units which don't have those abilities, just because you've brought the right backup and you've used your weapons in the right combination. And you'll put your enemy on the back foot, you'll be in a great position, their units will be exposed, and it's time to go to town. So that is everything to do with lascannons. Now, thank you very much for your patience. This has been a long video, but as usual I try and give you everything that you need to know from top to bottom about the topic that we're discussing, so that you have a reference point. You can come back and watch it if you need to. You can click back a little bit and just double check something, but I really hope that these videos and the format that I'm doing them in are helping you guys and continue to help you guys to maximise the efficiency of your units in the games and carry on winning games for the Blood Angels and for the Imperium. So thank you very much for your time. This is the Schola Progenium. Goodbye.